Canada's Prime Minister is really starting to feel the heat. It's after his MPs rounded on him for triggering never-before-used emergency powers to deal with an ongoing protest by truck drivers against vaccine mandates. Now, the leader of the opposition told him it would have just been better if he had stayed at his cottage, where he recently self-isolated.
Isn't it true that the Prime Minister's actions could serve to actually make things worse and not make things better?
This is about keeping Canadians safe, protecting their communities and neighbourhoods, and ensuring jobs and our economy.
This is about the Prime Minister's ideological attachment to keeping COVID restrictions and mandates. 63% of Canadians want the restrictions and mandates to end. Conservatives presented a motion yesterday asking simply for a plan, but the Prime Minister is in denial and is ignoring the science. He might as well be back at the cottage because he's doing nothing productive or constructive to help this situation.
The Emergencies Act is supposed to only be applied in the event of a national crisis. It gives the government extra powers for 30 days, including the ability to freeze bank accounts. But it's not meant to be used against peaceful demonstrators, which the truckers have been, though they are accused of causing disruption. We heard from one of the drivers in Ottawa who says the emergency powers could easily be abused.
Politicians understand that if they use this drastic measure, that it can be abused. And that's exactly what we're seeing today. We're not at war with anybody. Nobody's dying, nobody's getting kidnapped, but this federal government is trying to save face from a politician named Justin Trudeau who's trying to save his political career. And it's absolutely wrong. He needs to be held accountable, and citizens need to know that he is violating the Canadian Charter of Rights. One person should not have the power to initiate such a drastic measure by himself. This should be a unanimous 100% agreement of all premiers across the country. When there's a split and you have members of your own Liberal Party speaking up against this action of imposing the Federal Emergency Act, it shows division. It shows that there's no support. When he got in, it was 32% of Canadian votes, the lowest in Canadian history, and now those polls show that that has slipped to only 16%. So this is all about Justin Trudeau trying to save his political career, trying to save face and play like a rock star on the world stage, and it's wrong.
Supporters of the truckers' so-called Freedom Convoy remain camped out around Parliamentary Hill. It's right there in the country's capital. The atmosphere remains pretty festive, actually. The protest began over 2 weeks ago. The government made jabs compulsory for truckers working cross-border routes. All the same, most Canadian truckers are vaxxed, some 85%. Now, Justin Trudeau has defended the Emergencies Act and his COVID restrictions. Our panel of guests debated whether any rights, in the meantime, are being breached.
You cannot assert to stand for freedom while you simultaneously oppress the freedom of anyone else. And this has been an ongoing issue with Justin Trudeau in Canada. I mean, ever since he's been nothing but hypocritical. And the era of hypocrisy has to come to an end. And I'm very proud to say that Canadians across this country are not having it. They're going to stand up against this.
It's a little bit hypocritical, if you ask me, for the media and the Trudeau government to act now as if it's truckers who are causing all of this havoc. You cannot say that the restriction of movement and the disruption of the economy is necessary to protect public health for 2 years, but then all of a sudden, when Canadians are taking it upon themselves to stand up for their liberties, now it's too far, and how dare you interrupt with people's abilities to live their day-to-day lives? I don't buy it, and I think most of the Canadian public doesn't either.
Well, it's about the same attitude of many people here in Europe, even those who are vaccinated but are fed up with the lack of liberties that the political establishment has imposed on the French, on the Germans, on every country in Europe.
The Canadian Civil Liberties Association claims Justin Trudeau has not met the legal bar for declaring an emergency. He has to exhaust all legal options first and say that the move is going to harm democracy. Could it go beyond that? Could it cause really long-term harm here?
Now with Justin Trudeau enacting these Emergencies Act, I think the government has just gone one step further in saying that we're sorry, but the civil liberties you thought you enjoyed as Canadians are actually only subject to our whims. And I just hope that it doesn't get to a point where things actually do become violent because of the actions of the federal government, because, these protesters, they do not want conflict in that way. But when you take away, people's right to peacefully protest, and when you even threaten to remove their children from them, obviously things are going to rise in tensions and escalation.
The Freedom Convoy's gone truly global. On Monday, as you were talking about, we saw thousands of people descend on Brussels from across the EU. Do you think this is making governments think twice about relentless COVID restrictions, or is it making them double clamp down and saying, we've got the power, you got to listen to us, people?
No, they have understood the lesson. I'm sure of that. You know, in most countries in Europe now, governments try or are really ready to stop the measures, to take them down. Now is the time for parliaments everywhere in Europe to really look into these restrictions of liberties. And I don't think any government in Europe would dare try to go further.